It's a pleasure to be here, speaking about and speaking to all of you at the beginning of a hackathon. Uh, I would like to use a presentation because it might offer you some specific takeaways that you can then kind of note down or use in whichever way you want. So I will use the next 15 minutes. I'll just walk you through through a presentation. So I'd like to use this as the basis for the conversation, where how do you really start thinking out of the box if you want to, make a difference in this hackathon and do something really valuable. So to start with, we know the term thinking out of the box. It really means that you're not boxed in by certain thinking or certain patterns of or approaches that you have. And so when we say thinking out of the box, what we are saying is that you're stepping out of an existing set of patterns and set of axioms in which you operate, and you try to move into a new set of, how you might want to think about it outside the patterns that you are so far. However, what if we start looking at thinking out of the box as saying that it is not, you never really think out of a box, but you really start widening your box. So if, for example, today we are thinking in terms of techno-economic outcomes, if we start shifting our box or widening our box of thinking, because nobody is really ever out of any box. It's just the size of the box or the shape of the box changes. So really thinking out of the box means moving from a smaller box to a much bigger box of thinking. So from the notion of saying that I am here as making a specific techno-economic outcome, how do I move towards working with what I call a contribution purpose? Now, what do we mean by this idea of contribution purpose, and how do you think about it? So contribution purpose really means that the new way of thinking would really be start by asking the question, who are you trying to contribute to? Who are your stakeholders? So think about it. There are economic stakeholders, obviously. There are people who are trying to, who are looking at the economics of the whole thing. How are they going to, create economic value or financial value out of the whole thing? You also have social stakeholders. You have your, you have the community around, you have the environment, you have all kinds of stakeholders who are sitting there as part of your world. There are application stakeholders, because where your products, your whatever you're creating is going to be used by people, and it's going to be end used somewhere down the line. And especially if you take core industries, their applications are cascading down right into the the heart of society, or the warp and weft of economic life. So you have application stakeholders across the board who are all beneficiaries, and also they are people whose life, if you want to change, then you might want to start thinking very differently. You have your own domain community of stakeholders, which means that there are people in your field, other experts. You have other colleagues in your place. There is the global community of people in your industry or in your domain whom you are thinking about. You're also thinking about the value chain in which your innovation is going to be used, because you're going to use and that might be both the internal value chain which you're using, which is within your organization, and there is the user value chain. Especially if you use things like digital innovation, you can crash the gaps between the internal value chain of your organization with the user value chain radically. So you might make it into a single seamless whole, for example. Now, these are all examples of how you are thinking about the stakeholders. And when we are saying that I'm having a contribution purpose, the question that we are now asking is that for each of these stakeholders, or for some of these stakeholders, what is the new state of thinking that we want to bring into their life? Or what is this new new reality that we want to build. So sometimes we can start with a challenge or a problem, but the most exciting innovations take place when I start with an end state in mind and I say, I really want to shift the needle on this. I want to do something at a level which is a quantum leap over where we are today. And that quantum leap thinking starts coming only when I start thinking about a new reality for each or some of these stakeholders. So that's really what we mean when we say that we start thinking from contribution purpose. If there's a particular application stakeholder, maybe let us say the car industry, then you're saying, how can I radically improve some outcomes in the car industry from where I'm sitting here in an industry that's supplying something to them or it's providing something to them. So that's an example of what I mean by saying that this is what is the stakeholder contribution that you want to make. So this is the first starting point about what you think about and where you start thinking. The second big issue is, how do you think? Now, this is a very interesting question because, we've got right from the 1960s where you had Edward de Bono talking about lateral thinking, and recently in the last decade, we've had design thinking. So, for the last 30, 40 years, 50 years, there have been all kinds of people who have come and told us, given us techniques for, creative or innovative or lateral thinking. Here's another way of thinking about it, which might actually align with the notion of making a profound contribution, which is you begin with, first of all, as you said, what is that vision that you want in your user's life or in the end state or in the, whether in an economic value. If you say that I'm going to bring down costs by 50% now, and that will radically transform, let us say, the supply demand and I'm going to radically reduce costs, therefore, to all my stakeholders. It's going to change the economics of maybe hundreds of, buyers and hundreds of users. If that's, for example, even a very simple contribution vision, and there can be much bigger and far more holistic contribution visions that you can build. So how do you first envision that? So a lot of our thinking is about asking such dramatic questions and saying, here is my stakeholder and this is how I want to change that person's life. And this is how that person's life can change. So that's the first thing that you begin with. The second thing, which is very interesting, is that nobody is going to really tell you as to what is it that they want. And Steve Jobs famously made that statement that you don't really do a customer survey to find out, because they're really going to come from a current reality. So there is a sound of silence there, but it is in those sounds of silence that you listen. It's when they are not talking about certain things, when it is not even part of the agenda in their conversation, but they are suffering silently, that you start listening. When you start listening and watching, users, stakeholders, and you see that they have accepted a current reality, just think about our own society. You just see how much suffering in our day-to-day life we accept, and there is a sound of silence in everything that we do, whether in the roads we travel, whether in the way we navigate crowds in the country, the way we handle, let us say, urban life in this country, the kind of expectations that we may have from services around us. All that you can hear is not the noise of people, but actually the sounds of silence, of all that silent suffering that's going on. So maybe by listening to that silent suffering of your stakeholders, what you might actually come out with is a solution which is totally different. So market research is good, but I think it is far more important to listen to the gap between the words and to see the buts or the gaps, and to really start thinking from there and saying what can be done. The third thing is, where do we see from? The fact is that the eyes are sitting in our heads. The eyes, you have two eyes, great, but both the eyes are sitting in your head. So those are your eyes. So therefore, you are locked into a point of view. And because you are locked into a point of view, your reality will always be only a truncated reality. The more we want to really understand that reality, the more we want to understand what can be done, we need to see through many eyes. which means we have to be willing to say that let me get out of my head alone and also look at it from maybe a user's head, maybe look at it from a worker's head, maybe look at it from a logistics person's head, and maybe look at it from a marketing guy's head, and you can look at it from so many and when you see from that, you have many different eyes through which you see a problem. And that is when those perspectives build up, and what you start discovering is something else altogether. So it's very interesting that we need to listen to the sounds of silence, and we need to see through many eyes. And the most important thing is, especially if you are working in teams, we talk about collaboration, but what is really collaborating? Collaborating is not tolerating each other and accepting points of view, but it is actually about building on each other, right? So really, when you're looking, whether at a team level, whether you're talking to your stakeholders, whether you're trying to design an answer and trying to work it out, it's how you build on what each other says, what other people say, what the research is saying, what other innovators are saying. It is our capacity to build rapidly on each other that will allow us to ramp up the innovation curve. We can't get from 0 to 100, while we can maybe think of a vision, but in order to go there, we have to still climb. And the longer the distance, we have to climb climb many more steps. And the only way we can climb all these steps is if we climb and build on each other, so that you're able to rapidly climb up and reach that new state that you want. And the next point, which might be what that means, if you want to think differently, you want to do these things differently, you have to be different. Ultimately, it comes down to who you are. If you see yourself only as a designer or as an innovator, that's only one circle out of many. But you need to see yourself. Your own identity should be that of saying, I'm also a researcher. I'm also a catalyst of human potential around me. That means I'm encouraging others also to unleash their potential. And I'm also a radical change player. And I'm also an entrepreneur. And I'm also a builder, which means that we need to widen our own identities. We need to widen our own sense of self. So we don't get locked up as saying, oh, I'm just a student, I'm just a teacher, I'm just I'm good in creativity, so I'm just an innovator. No, I'm much more. I'm just a great contributor. And I think that if you just start out by saying I'm a contributor, then this whole new thinking starts really emerging and starts building. And given the time constraint, I just want to quickly end with one last point as a starting point for your thinking. These are big ideas. But if you really want to start, then here's the thought that I think you can start with, which is that don't just start with a specific challenge or a outcome alone. That's a good place to start, but also start by asking what human or what social or organizational or domain purpose or vision you want to serve, or what you want to make happen in the world. So begin with what you want to make happen, rather than only what challenge you solve, and then you will start your journey of being a contributor. So with these few words, I'd like to stop here.